Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are so excited to be here with all of you today. We are going to have a great session and we are going to dive right in and get started. You'll see right here on the screen a bit.ly for the resources for today, which I will also be putting up again for you throughout the session. So if you miss it right now, it's all right because I will be placing it kind of as a banner as you need it kind of across the bottom like you see here. So we're excited to kind of jump right in and dive on in with all of you and get started. My name is Katie, and I am going to kind of be your MC here, supporting our amazing presenter. And if you have questions or comments or want to participate with us, please let us know in the comments. We would love to connect with you and just have some fun with you throughout this session. And most importantly, if you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to let us know. And then I'm going to go ahead and give our amazing presenter a moment to introduce herself.
Hey everybody, my name is Monica Gadsby. I'm an educator in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I'm so excited to share my presentation with you today. And so we're going to start off with our land acknowledgements. Like I said, my name is Monica, and I acknowledge that I'm a first-generation immigrant. I'm coming from Treaty 1 territory. Treaty 1 is the traditional lands of the Waters Anishinaabe, Inuak, Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and it's also the birthplace of the homeland of the Métis Nation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And if you want to learn more about where you are, feel free to go check out native-land.ca. It's a really great resource. And even if you know about where you are, it's a really great resource just to check out in general. I like to use this resource if I'm traveling to a new area to learn about it. So definitely make sure you check that out. All right, so we are here with Logix Academy, and we just want to give a little bit of a shout out about us before we dive in. Logix Academy is a partner to many different amazing programs and tools through Microsoft and Apple and Google, and we just want to kind of give that a little bit of a quick shout out, and also with other amazing tools and fun resources that you can check out as well through different robotics and things like that. And then finally, we wanted to give a big thank you to the reason why we're here today, but we wanted to sincerely thank Microsoft for their generous support of this workshop series as a part of their commitment to fostering a broader understanding of AI. And that's kind of why we're here with you guys today. And so we just wanted to take a quick moment to thank them for supporting that and bringing us to you. With that, thank you so much for listening to all of our fun things getting started. And I'm going to pass it back to our amazing presenter, and let's go learn and have some fun together.
Great. Thank you, Katie. So my presentation is about AI through a social justice lens. And what I'm talking to you today about is perspectives. But it's not only just perspectives, it's modern insights of different perspectives meeting ancient wisdom. And together, that's a powerhouse. And so what I'm asking for everyone today is an invitation. And this is an invitation to come with some compassion, empathy, and vulnerability, and understanding that not everybody shares the same perspectives. And when having a vast variety of different perspectives, you're able to understand the world in a very different context, because we only see what we're able to comprehend. And so if we're only able to see what we're able to comprehend, then it also limit us from seeing how other people experience the world. And this is why it's essential that we have to understand different people's perspectives, because people live the world very differently. The way that I see the world and the way that I experience the world is going to be very different from the way that you experience the world. And so we have to lean in and listen to other people's perspectives and listen to the way that they see the world in order to understand the world as a better place, in order to make decisions, in order to solve problems in the world, and that is where we need to be in the world, because we can only solve problems from multiple perspectives. And when there's one view and there's one perspective, it leaves us very, very vulnerable in understanding that there's not just one worldview. But if there's only one worldview that's being noted and being used, it imposes inherent dangers and risks to the world, because we're not living as a global collective of humanity. And so we have to think very, very critically about that, especially in the times we're in right now. And so I get these notifications that come weekly in my inbox from James Clear. There are 3-2-1 prompts every week, and this one came last week, and it talked about it talked about the idea of unlearning. And in this quote, he talks about the identities that are built on our beliefs and making it hard to question them. And so, because we live in our identities, but truth requires us to confront and sometimes change the way that we believe things. And so, we got to think of identity as a book. Sometimes chapters need rewriting, sometimes expanding, and sometimes even removing. And in order to start unlearning, we have to be curious. So ask why you believe what you do. You have to be seeking different perspectives and being open to being wrong. Okay. And part of that is growth. Unlearning isn't losing your identity, it's evolving. And it's evolving to become more adaptable and resilient in the world that we are today. And so, if growth is unlearning, what are the things that we have to unlearn in this world? And this is a really important question, because it goes back to the fundamental things of who we are, identity, which is a core root that exists within all of us. So one of my favorite books is by Bell Hooks, and they talk about this notion about love. Okay, and love is a transformative power where it challenges us with the conventional notions of what love is. And so love is no longer a noun, it is an action. And we have to take a look at how we emphasize love as an act of choice that involves care, that involves respect and commitment. And so the world that we're living in the post-pandemic world, we were going through a mental health crisis before the pandemic. And after the rise of the pandemic, then and AI is kind of has flooded the scene. The mental health, the process of mental health hasn't changed, and so we are still living in a world where we're deeply impacted by the pandemic. And so what we're trying to do, what I'm trying to say is the idea of the self-love crisis, which is where we're in, is we actually don't know who we are as ourselves. Okay. And once we lean into ourselves, we can discover a lot about who we are. And so the self-love crisis involves us leaning into ourselves and figuring out who we are as our identity and what our purpose is in life. And so they argue that understanding and practicing genuine love can actually heal personal and societal wounds. And it also fosters deeper connections with each other and helps resolve social justice issues. So that's the key here. The self-love crisis is real, and it's only getting bigger, especially how polarizing and how dividing the world is. In their article, and Bell Hooks, where they talk about, in the article, choosing the margins as a space of radical openness, I really identified with this article because I live in the margins, and I not only live in the margins, I survive in the margins and I thrive in the margins. And that's where I exist. And that's also a site of resistance. And when I talk about the margins, I'm talking about the outskirts of what is power and what is privilege. And this call to action talks about the idea of marginality as a site of resistance, and what implication does it have for understanding the dynamics of power in society, and what does that look like? And so Bell Hooks talks about this being an invitation. And this is not only just an invitation because it's an option, it's actually necessary. Because in order to make change, we need to do this together in community. Because previously, in the previous slides, self-love cannot be done in isolation. And so we actually need a commitment of community and collectiveness in order to create the change needed in this world. And when we talk about this to be on the margins, we have to rethink about what the margins look like. And we have to be in a place for openness and a calling in, and not a calling out. Because when you call people out, what ends up happening, people get defensive and people don't want to connect, right? And so this is an invitation and allows people to invite people into those margins as a space, as liberators, because we can only do this in community and the collective, and it's for the collective good. And so in these places of the margins, in what ways can artistic and literacy practices transform and reclaim these spaces? Because we know that art is a form of resistance, and you cannot stop the form of you cannot start art as a form of transformative power. And so we kind of take a look at what the margins looks like for both being real and imagined, according to the perspectives of bell hooks. Chris Emden, from his book Rotodemic, he talks about the idea of knowledge. And I really love how he breaks this down, and it makes me rethink about what knowledge is. Okay. In a time that we're living in right now, we have to kind of reassess the language that we're using, and think about the relevance and the importance of what this is. So he goes on to explain in his book about the knowledge of self. That it's actually essential for kids to know who they are, their identity, who you are, your ancestors, your beautiful stories, your struggles that exist, and the need to find value in themselves. Because once kids find value in themselves and knowing, they're able to move on to understanding the world and conceptualize how they're placed in this environment and how they're placed in this world. So first is knowledge of self. The second is knowledge of environment. And so all young folks need opportunities to reflect on the environment that they're in and ask the questions of why and where they are. So question the environment. So things like, why is this an affluent neighborhood? Why is this not an affluent neighborhood? Why is there more fast food options in certain neighborhoods than there are grocery stores? You need to be questioning your environment. And then the last form of knowledge is the academic knowledge, right? And that's a knowledge of the subject areas that we do in schools, but in content to relation to who they are in the present world, their knowledge of self and their knowledge of environment, because relevance matters. Okay. When academic knowledge is mixed with relevance, magic happens because they're able to place themselves in the world where they belong and who they are in order to make real change in the world. And this is why identity is a crucial piece to understanding what learning is. Another big piece of this is understanding that once you have identity and that becomes your powerhouse, you're able to make real transformational change. Because once I lean into myself and I know who I am, I'm able to lean outwards and care about other people. But if I don't know how to lean into myself and love myself, how can I care about others? And so this is really important when we talk about the real transformative power of education and identity. And so currently, one of the things that we're looking at in my program that I'm taking at the U of M, my master's in holistic education, one of the big things that I've learned was understanding what critical discourse analysis is. And it's actually essential when we're looking at artificial intelligence in the world. It lets us talk about what the mythical norm is, right? And so those norms are unrealistic standards that many of us feel that we meet to be accepted or valued. But the truth is, it's just a myth, and it doesn't reflect the rich diversity of human experiences and identities. And so we have to challenge what that myth is and dismantle the mythical norm. And how do we do that? We need to create environments where all identities are valued and all identities are celebrated. And so that starts with recognizing and challenging our own biases, right? And so that is where the unlearning comes in, advocating for inclusive policies, and fostering a culture of acceptance and understanding. And so the mythical norm here is defined as what is the norm in this value of the systems and structures that we live today in. And what it is white, thin, male, young, heterosexual, Christian, and financially secure, which is where all the power is in the world. Okay, and those power dynamics come with privilege. And we'll look at this very shortly. And so by doing so, we help to ensure that everyone can see their unique identity as a strength, okay, and don't feel broken within their own sense of identity. And it's not a flaw. And we empower individuals to embrace who they are without feeling the need to conform to an unrealistic and exclusionary standard of what it is to be normal. Okay, so what I'm talking about here is the power and privilege wheel. And what this wheel does, it shows different degrees to which a person can be marginalized or have power over others in society based on different characteristics. And you can see here there's many different characteristics, some that you can see that are visible and some that are internalized that you're not able to know unless you talk to somebody, unless you talk to the person. And this is why it's important to understand how much we have to be leaning in, because this is only, you can only see so much from the outside. So from what you see on the outside, I can identify as a female, and I have brown skin. Okay, but there's many different marginalized power dynamics that exist that you're not able to see. And so this is something that we all have to be leaning in, figuring out where we are as a member as an advantage group and where we are as a member of disadvantaged group. And Kimberly Crenshaw termed the coin intersectionality, where she emphasized that focusing on a single identity prevents us from understanding the systemic patterns that advantage some and then disadvantage others. And she explains that belonging to multiple oppressed identity groups can lead to compound challenges. It actually makes it harder. And so she stresses the need for the importance of understanding the complexity of not only the system, but the complexity of who we are as individuals and our identity and our lived experiences. And this is a time right now where we really need to be leaning into this, where we need to be examining ourselves. And this is where the unlearning comes from both as an individual and how that contributes to larger social problems and social groups, and recognizing the influence of socialization and those institutional structures which we all live in. Okay, so this next one, it's going back to critical discourse analysis. And now we've taken a look at the idea of power and privilege. What is power and discourse, which is the conversation that we need to be having. So anything that we're tackling right now in the world, right now, we need to be having discourse. We need to be understanding how language is being imposed in certain ways and why marginalizing others and silencing them. And so whose voices are being heard in the main context, and how does the language play a role in this? How does it embed power relations? And how does that influence larger social problems? And in the world that we're living in with generative AI and technology, we always need to be having this discourse of what conversation is being said at the forefront, what conversations are missing. And so we need to be looking at things with a critical lens, because this technology is not going anywhere, and I'm happy for this technology to exist. However, we have to be changing the way that we look at media, the way we look at images, because it's important and essential, because not all voices are being heard. And that's going to actually, it's actually going to hurt our society and not actually help us. And so critical discourse analysis thinks about whose eyes are being at the main focus point of this technology, right? And whose perspectives are being viewed. And as what those perspectives are, what are those norms and values that are being placed in this technology, and whose norms and values those are? Because they're not mine, right? And so in this technology, or even just anything that we do, whether that's media or with literacy, who thrives, who dies, okay, whose body matters, okay, whose history survives, cultural erasure, which we've seen over and over again. History tells us this. This is another form. Who gets policed, who is safe, and who is missing. And this is where the critical discourse analysis must happen, because this is essential in understanding of how do we amplify the voices that are not seen and not heard? How do we amplify the stories? Okay, and that comes with the identity. And so when we talk about critical discourse analysis and language, we have to take a look at what language actually is currently. And so some of the most spoken language, as we know, is English. English is the number one language that is currently spoken in the world. But there are also other languages that exist. Okay, but currently, with artificial intelligence, what language is the original data collected from? And we know that it's English, right? And so, and that also has its own set of norms and values that don't include other languages. And when you're not including other languages, those norms and values are also excluded from that. Okay, and so whose global perspectives are being utilized to use this framework in this technology? Because it's not a global perspective. Okay, so it's very, very limited in those perspectives. And I think about this as a person who speaks Hindi. Some of these things you can't even directly translate, right? And so there's words and languages that exist as a reason for that. So in my language, in Hindi, there's no word for divorce. That doesn't mean that divorce doesn't exist. We just borrow it from Pakistan, the Urdu word, which is talaq. And so if languages are transcending and changing, we also have to reevaluate what does privileging language mean, and what does a language and definitions mean now. We kind of have to kind of transform what those look like and reevaluate what that looks like. And so Chris Emden, in his book STEM Make Dream, he talks about how the words that don't exist for you shape your identity even more than the words that you hear. Every kid needs to have the ability to hear that they're all creators, innovators, makers, thinkers. And these words are very crucial for kids to hear, and for all kids to hear, because the words unsaid find a way to create a fracture in one's sense of self, which is identity. This is the root of everything, folks. And this is where it's so essential to be talking about identity and infusing it in everything that we do. And it starts off with that. Chris Emden also talks about reimagining the words that we use for STEAM, right? And it's not just STEM, it's STEAM, and how we use A, which is art, and the need to serve as an anchor for instruction, and that art is identity. And so once we infuse our identity in the work that we do, that's where real and meaningful change happens, because we are not only is the work relevant to who we are, but it will also solve larger social issues that exist. And so, what are ways that we're combating this? Currently, our division is involved in this, where we have BSU students across the division collectively involved in STEM Club. That's led by Let's Talk Science. And so this is a really good initiative, because we're understanding this is actually STEAM education is actually an anti-racism movement, right? And so we need to privilege the words, and we need to privilege the kids behind it to make sure that every kid is included in this work. And so I had mentioned earlier, I recently started my master's with a focus on contemplative, holistic, and integrative education at U of M. And one of the things we looked at this summer is looking at current worldviews and the worldviews that we live in. And so on the left is currently where our worldview is sitting, which is perpetuated by multiple systems that make the system the way they are, right? And so that includes advanced capitalism, that includes neoliberalism approaches, that includes white supremacy, that includes globalization, and it includes patriarchy. And these systems that are set up this way are designed where man's on top and everyone else is below. And how does that impact human nature relationships? Well, in this case, the diagram highlights the ways that humans can be perceived and interact with the natural world, that man is greater than nature, right? And that we are above nature. But we know that's not the case, because we know that we're all connected. And it's important to understand that. But the way that our worldview is set up right now, it doesn't reflect that. Our values and our priorities in life, where this egoism worldview emphasizes individual needs and desires versus environmentalism, where it prioritizes health and sustainability of the planet, right? And how we are connected with not only the ecosystem of animals, but with land. And what does that imply for the ethical implications of the world? And this really goes into the ethical implications of how we treat other species and manage our natural resources. And this is really, really fundamental in the time right now during climate crisis, where we really need to understand that humans are not greater than nature, and that we're all interconnected and everyone plays a part. And once one is impacted, there's a ripple effect, and everybody gets impacted by this. But one thing I noticed in this ego in versus eco is that we're actually missing something. And that is mental health. Mental health is also part of this. And so is artificial intelligence. Technology is deeply embedded and interconnected in everything we do. We can't live without these devices, right? And we have AI embedded in all forms of system. And so we are interconnected, and it impacts everybody on a different level. And it not just impacts just us and our mental health, we are as humans, but it also impacts nature. It impacts the animals, and it impacts relationships. And these are the unintended consequences of how we're all interconnected. But if we are only, when we are in this ego perspective, in this worldview, we're denying the fact that we're all connected. And this is very, very troublesome, right? When we're denying the fact that we're all interconnected, because we know the realities that we are. And so we have to change the mindset, and we have to unlearn what it is to be connected. And so my journey of what it is to be connected is understanding where we go back to ancient wisdom practices, right? Perspectives versus modern insights and perspectives versus ancient wisdom practices. And what I'm really talking about here is Indigenous perspectives and Indigenous knowledge, and how we have to advance Indigenous knowledge and perspectives in all of this. And so in the Mamatuaswen document, there's a section there where we talk about reconciliation, and they talk about how in order for reconciliation to be resolved, we actually need to have a relationship between the natural world as well. And Aboriginal perspective requires a relationship with that natural world. And so if human beings resolve problems between themselves but continue to destroy the natural world, then reconciliation remains complete. And I'm like, oh no, well, we have some work to do, because if this is what we are trying to do and we're trying to move for the 94 calls of actions, then we actually have to recognize, one, the truth that exists with all of this, right? And to not denying the truth, and then the actions that we need in order to have restorative justice. And so this is part of this. And so what are we doing in this world right now? What is our relationship plan? Because we are all here as Canadians, recognizing that we're all treaty people and we all have a collective responsibility. And this collective responsibility comes with the idea that we're all connected. And what's really neat about this is I was reading an article or a paper about unlearning colonialism and renewing kinship relations. And this is an interesting article. It talks about colonial forms of relationship denial. And it's beyond the intellectual of academia. It goes beyond the fact that if we only accepting the colonial worldview, which is man on top and everyone below, then we're actually denying the fact that there's relationships. And in order to deny relationships, and if you continue to deny relationships, this maintains the status quo of what colonialism is. And so in order to understand those colonial forms of relationships, it actually continues to divide the world. And so how does this impact all these connections? And especially what we're talking about today is this technology of artificial intelligence, which is embedded in this worldview. And it's not because it was purposely done this way, right? And this is just the way the system is and it's set up, right? And so who's behind the scenes, right? Actually, I would rephrase that. It is actually purposely done this way. It's designed this way. And so what are we doing to combat that? And we have to do that through critical discourse, and we have to have conversations and having a collective shared knowledge of understanding how to tackle this problem. Because denying our existence, denying relationships will only continue to divide people. Okay, and this goes hand in hand with all the systems that we live in, with going back to education, the gaps in schools between the have and have-nots as the divide gets greater. And as this technology is advancing, right, what does it mean for achievement gaps? We have to redefine what this looks like. And so the gaps in schools, as we know, is from systems that are designed not due to a lack of resources, but it says here, result of historical, economic, social, political, and moral factors that perpetuate these achievement gaps. And so what does it look like for STEAM education? What does that look like for our students? So James Clear, John Spencer, he wrote the book, The AI Roadmap. And in this book, he talks about how, this is a good quote, I really appreciate this, how generative AI has a potential to revolutionize the way educators approach assessment and evaluations, which a lot of people are going to be talking about today, which I'm really excited about. It allows people to focus on what the human aspects of education, and it brings back the forefront of what matters in education. And so we have a chance here, as we talk about redefining languages and privileging language, we have an opportunity here to redefine a few things. And what does that actually mean to us in this present world with this technology impacting on us and embedding those values and those norms? So what is achievement? Katie, you want to help me out with that?
And feel free to let us know, post a comment. We would love for you to kind of hop in this conversation with us as you're seeing these questions pop up. And I just want to thank you so far. This is such an amazing topic and such great things that you're discussing with us. And we would love to hear everybody's thoughts as we are, moving through, and we can share those with everyone. So feel free to pop those in the chat.
And so as we're privileging language and we're reframing the way that language is being seen, we have to kind of redefine a whole bunch of things. What is self-love? What is achievement? What is knowledge? Right. And so what does knowledge look like? And so Chris and then breaks this down of what knowledge is, and what knowledge can look like reimagined. The purpose of school, is it really just about the academics? Is it really just about the grades? It's no longer about that, especially when we have this technology at our fingertips in order to get the correct answers that we need. And so we really have to reevaluate what the purpose of school is now. And this is actually about time that we do this, right? And so if this is what generative AI or technology or artificial intelligence is going to make us do, and then so this is a time that we actually have to be critically thinking about why we're in school and what we're doing, because it's beyond the academics. It's a knowledge of self, the knowledge of mind, body, and soul connected, right? And in order to empower us as individuals to make real change in the world.
Well, and I think that you really just said it really well, that we have to kind of rethink because we have so much new information or easy information at our fingertips, whether it's us and or our students, like things that we didn't have. Like, I know when I was in school, they have so much more access now. So really that redefining of that purpose of school, I think, is a really important conversation to have. And I love that you mentioned that, so thank you.
Thank you. And then been doing these presentations across different schools in my division, and I do these little ones, and we have different conversations about what it is to be human, and the conversations are amazing. And it goes beyond the fact of just knowledge. It goes to the fact that we have souls, that we have blood, we have the ability to give life, and so we have to really privilege what it is to be human in the time right now with this technology. And it's really interesting to see the different conversations and the different answers that kids come up with, anywhere from kids from grade 3 to grade 9 and grade 10. They all have different answers, but the message is the same: is that humans, we actually really need to define what this is to be humans in a world where we're saying that this is artificial intelligence, right? And so if this is AI, then what it is to be human, it's actually really important to privilege that language.
I love that you're having that conversation with students. That's amazing.
Thank you. And so, as we redefine language and redefining the meaning of things are, we also have to redefine this whole woke agenda, right? This conversation that's being kind of skewed in a negative way, and we kind of have to really bring this to light. As I mentioned before, perspectives matter. Global perspectives are important in order and essential to make real change in the world. We actually have to redefine what DEI is, and a colleague of mine, Karen Ridd, they did a presentation with the power of stories, and they're a lecturer for conflict resolution studies at Canadian Mennonite University. And in a conversation, she redefined DEI for me, and I'm just really thankful for it, because it really put into a different perspective of what DEI is. And it's no longer just the checkbox of saying that you did what you did, and here you go, there's diversity in the classroom, there's diversity of teachers, and that's good enough. Diversity is the ability to allow people to enter the door. And equity is allowing people to sit and come to the table. And inclusion is letting people speak at the table, right? To use their voice. Okay, but none of this is possible in order to have these different unique perspectives without the sense of belonging. And belonging is when there is a space for what people say or do to make real change in the world, and to make changes that involve conversations on the table. And so when she redefined what this is, it really made me think about where our current structures are, and where is our structures of power and privilege, and what that is. Because what that looks like right now is essential in order to make the real changes in this world, because we actually need more voices at the table and from different perspectives in order to make the real changes needed in this world. And you need to have a sense of belonging in order to do so. And it starts off with that. John Spencer, in his book, The AI Roadmap, he talks about how AI will impact multiple things in our world, and the unintended consequences of doing so. And we're seeing that, and we're living that right now as the advances of technology is going, and it's making real change in the world, good for the good and for equally for the bad at the same time, right? And so these are both conversations we have to look at. And it's really neat because it lets us think about and again, go back to the fact that we're all connected and it's all interconnected. And so how does this technology impact all of these? And they actually do. Anywhere down from information literacy, which we're seeing, and misinformation and disinformation, cultural connections, relationships, the way that these algorithms are designed in order to connect us, right? And how we're using social media to connect with other people. It's redefining how we interact with the world. The environment, it poses a real threat to the environment, and we know that. And so what is a collective responsibility and the human responsibility that's needed, and to ensure that environment and the relationship with nature, and the relationship with land is at the forefront of what we do here, because we know that we have to move past truth and move towards reconciliation. The job market and the economy, we know that in the next 10 years, 30% of jobs in the industry are going to require some information literacy in regards to artificial intelligence. And so what are we doing in the education sector in order to feed that job market? Also, what are some jobs that are going to be lost as a result of that? And what are some new jobs that are going to be formed as a result of that too? So there's pros and cons to all of this. We see this right now with democracy, how divided and polarized our world is. How does artificial intelligence play a role in this? And we see this with the elections. And over half the world is going through a current election process in this year. And so how is this technology being used to inform the practices of what that is? Privacy, that's a big thing right now with data security and privacy, and it's a threat to our existence, right? And we have to rethink about some of the laws and the enforcement policies that are put in place in order to protect our information as this technology is only getting greater. Criminal justice and public safety, who we are as individuals, impacts, as we know that this technology is not only there to help us, but it also amplifies biases, and it's rooted in what we've put into the model, right? And so not only does it perpetuate biases and stereotypes, but it amplifies that. And so when it amplifies stereotypes and biases, what does that do to the people who live on the margins, right? And it impacts them first, right? And so when we talk about public safety and we talk about criminal justice, those impacted already are going to be heightened. That impact is going to be heightened. And what does that mean to be creative anymore? And we'd have to redefine that as well. And the creative world that exists and what we do in the world, we have to change the way we think about that. And it also brings up the idea of can we be creators in this world, and who has the rights and ownership to our stuff, or to our work and to our knowledge. So this book that I read about the promises and perils of AI in education, one of the biggest things that stood out for me is that usually when people talk about AI and advancement tools, it's usually like a 1 or 2 sentence disclaimer about biases and stereotypes that exist in the world, and then we have to have safeguards. But this book is actually dedicated to the entire, that one sentence is the entire book, and it's dedicated to justice in education and the historical injustices that actually happen, that have happened and continue to happen, perpetuate with this technology. And so he talks about how we are ethically bound to bravely confront these uncomfortable truths. And this stuff is not comfortable to talk about. It's not easy to talk about this, but we actually have to. And so being uncomfortable is actually a good thing. And we have to lean into what we need to unlearn. Right. And so, we're in a place of privilege and power to do so. And some of us aren't. Right. And so what we have to do is how do we lean in and understand where we can give our privilege and where our privilege lies, and where we can give our power to people in order to liberate everybody. Right. And what that looks like. Another article that I read talks about the idea of, and this is going back to the DEI perspective, teens lacking diverse perspectives and voices from underrepresented groups perpetuate biases and discrimination against those communities when developing any applications. In this case, it's AI applications, right? And so we have to understand how that actually impacts everybody, right? Because if this is going to be if this is what it is right now, and it's being impacted in all systems, we need to make sure that we have all voices behind the scenes in order to develop ongoing applications of artificial intelligence. And so, reiterate here, artificial intelligence is not magic. This is a marketing tactic. We see these with the magic wand and the hurrah, and it's all done. There is science behind everything that we do, and we need to educate people what this is. It's not magic, right? And this is marketing. Artificial intelligence is not neutral, and we know that humans are not neutral. We have biases that exist, and we have a subconscious bias that feeds all of our thoughts and our actions. And so we have to understand what that is. Artificial intelligence is not a critical thinker. Humans are as a skill, and we have to practice this of what it is to be a critical thinker. And it's actually a skill right now that is actually absolutely essential in education, where we actually have to be critically thinking and question everything. And then the idea that artificial intelligence is human is not, right? And we know that, but we also have to educate the public in the awareness of it. It is not human, right? And then so what are the things that privilege us to be human in the world, and how do we use this? How do we move forward with this? How do we move forward with this technology, understanding what our privilege is to be human and enforce this technology for the good? How does this impact our world right now in terms of what it sees? And it only sees what humans have inputted and fed it, right? And so if I take I did a generative AI here about unprofessional hairstyles, and these are the things that popped up. And right, so when I look at these unprofessional hairstyles, these are just hairstyles of regular people, right? But how are these perceived as unprofessional? And then if I go and use, for example, some sort of AI software where I'm looking for professionals in industry, this is going to be something that's going to pop up as an algorithm saying that these are considered unprofessional. And so what are the people that have this type of hairstyle, right? They're not deemed professional, right? And what does that mean for the job market and for them? And so this is really important to be really discussing about some of the hidden things that are conversations that are just being seen at surface level, and we really have to dissect that surface level. And so this is just one example of how generative AI or artificial intelligence can play a role in excluding people. Not only does it exclude people, we know it amplifies biases and stereotypes that already exist in the world. So here is an example from Stable Diffusion, which is an AI generator, image generator, and Stable Diffusion perpetuates criminal stereotypes, right? And so it's only what the media portrays, right? And so if the media is portraying this on the internet and we're seeing this over and over again, it's only going to amplify what that looks like. And so if I were to ask for a composite of an average person, of an inmate, take a look at the skin tones that are there, right? We know that the reality is that's not the case, but the reality here in what the world sees based off the internet and what media it feeds, it's racist, right? And so we have to really, really think about we really have to question some of the generative AI images that pop up, right? And think about whose voices are being silenced, whose voices are being amplified in this. And so we take a look at the skin tones of drug dealers and then the skin tones of terrorists, right? And you just see the inequity and everything, right, when it comes to Stable Diffusion or just generative AI in general, because it's just taking off of what we've inputted. And we have not been good as humans to treat each other, right? And it's a reflection of our human understandings and the way that we connect with the world. When we're talking about the unintended consequences, this is a really interesting thing. It's called Replika. Replika is an application that was launched in early March of 2017. And this program advertised themselves as a mental health and a wellness application to combat loneliness. They had over 10 million downloads. But what this really turned into was a romantic relationship with people and flirtatious messages behind paywalls where people would have to pay for this. You can even see the differences for a free version versus a pro replica, how women are dressed, how women are censored in this world. And this hypersexualized add-ons that were behind paywalls. That was never intended, but never intentional, but it never intentional to amplify these biases and stereotypes of sexism, but exists, right? And so what people were doing is a lot of people signed up for this pro replica, and then they had to rethink about some of the ways that this stuff was being used. Is like people became dependent on this technology, and the dependency on this technology was because humans crave connection. And so this goes back to some of the research from MIT professor Joseph Weizenbaum, where he discovered a chat bot that was created named Eliza, and it was a simple pattern matching that stimulated conversation. and often giving the illusion that it understood them deeply. And so this is conversation and research that was done way back in the day. And so he talked about how problematic this is, and how it affects our interactions, AI and other automated systems. With it, humans can't tell the difference. And especially when we're craving connection in a time of loneliness and where we are with our mental health crisis that we're in right now, this is actually really fundamentally problematic. And so, what are the conversations we need to be having as educators to talk about what it is to be human, and defining relationships and using that time in classrooms to really build these relationships with people? And we see this, and this is just the very beginning of the Eliza effect. This is New York Times documented a heartbreaking story of a 14-year-old ninth grade student named Sewell Setzer, who committed suicide after becoming emotionally dependent on character AI chatbot. And shortly after these text messages, which he traded sexual messages with the teen, while not preventing the talk of suicide, and unintentionally was used as collateral damage for this for character AI. And shortly after this conversation, he took his stepfather's gun and shot himself in the head. And so suicide is real, right? Mental health crisis is real. This is the very beginning that we're seeing the impacts of how technology is interconnected and embedded in all of us, right? And how the detrimental effects, if we're not actually having these conversations, of human connection and relationships, and the knowledge of just understanding these chatbots and the guardrails that needs to happen with these things, right? So whether we're not talking about these at school, kids are going home and having these conversations on these chatbots and using them, right? And there's no guardrails. And so we have to educate kids and talk about what this is and how harmful and the potential harmful impacts of what this is. So this is a figure from World Economic Forum that talks about global risks in the world, and the global risks are ranked by severity over short and long-term periods. And I'm just going to take a highlight here because we're running short on time. The number one thing in the next 2 years is misinformation and disinformation, which means it's going to get worse before it gets better, right? And we're living in right now on a widespread distrust in government and news media and manipulated content that threatens to make existing tensions significantly worse. And we're seeing this live as we speak. Misinformation and disinformation, they are a major global risk over the next 2 years, potentially undermining the legitimacy of elections, as we know, and several countries, leading to unrest. So the spread of false information could polarize public discourse, from public health to social justice issues, right? And so in response, governments might have to increase control over information, risking further repression of freedoms related to internet, press, and access to information, which, if they undermine public trust, they distort the truth and erode the very foundation of democracy, which is important right now because democracy is at threat. And when falsehood spreads and goes unchecked, it influences anything that incites violence, and within our communities. And we have to recognize what the strength is of democracy that depends on informed and engaged citizenship. It also becomes a responsibility to seek out accurate information and to question sources. Go back to the thing, what it is to be human, critical thinking, right? About how content is used and how we consume content and how we share content. So I'm going to go back to the example of previously on air, over 67 million people watched the presidential debate. My brothers and sisters of the Haitian community in Springfield, Ohio, the anti-immigration rhetoric that's spewing and how it's spewing here in Canada, it needs to stop. This is reckless rhetoric on anti-immigration laws and anti-immigration people, and it's making people feel unsafe. We are a nation built by immigrants, including myself, who are enriched by cultures and strengthened by their contributions. And these anti-immigration rhetorics threaten and undermine the very principles and the foundations that we exist in. And so we have to think about where our country was founded, and it's founded on the values of compassion, inclusivity, and the opportunity that define us of who we are as Canadians. And so we have to remember that immigrants are not just stats and headlines; they are our neighbors, they're our friends, and they're our colleagues. And this is something that we have to bring diverse perspectives. Going back to the theme that you see We have to bring diverse perspectives and skills that drive innovation and economic growth. And we actually need immigrants, right? This is a fundamental thing we need. And immigrants need us, okay? And this is what it comes down to is allyship. We need each other. We cannot do this in isolation. It involves a collective good. And so, how do we respond to these risks? It goes back to these fundamental things of international cooperation. Countries should collaborate on global standards and ethical guidelines to ensure that we have responsible use, that there's equitable benefits, and we have to take a look at cross-border challenges like data privacy and cybersecurity, which is threatening everybody and globally right now with the advancement of this technology. Digital literacy, which is where educators come into place. Enhancing digital literacy empowers individuals to understand what AI is, its impacts, and to critically evaluate AI-driven information, helping us protect against risks like misinformation, which we just talked about, and then privacy. And then having robust regulatory frameworks. Note here, I don't say policy, it's frameworks, right? And these are guidelines that we need to have. And they're comprehensive regulations that are essential for overseeing these developments, ensuring transparency, accountability, and fairness that prevents harmful practices and fostering public trust, because that's what we need in this stuff, in this technology. And so I leave you with the idea that we actually have to be teaching that the world is on fire. Our world faces unprecedented challenges like climate change, social inequality, and technological disruption. Our future of our planet and our societies hinge on the education that we provide today. And so we have to remember that the impact of a great teacher extends far beyond the walls of a classroom. It shapes leaders, it shapes thinkers, and change makers for tomorrow. And so we have to be teaching with passion and purpose, and with the unwavering belief that education is the key to unlocking a brighter future. And so, in the words of the late Justice Murray Sinclair, education has got us into this mess, and education will get us out of it. And so that's what I leave you with today.
Thank you so very much. That was amazing. And everyone, I just put the link to our feedback form on the screen, and I will also go ahead and place it in the chat. If you could please take a few moments to complete that now. I know we're in our final few moments of this session together, and there are many other great sessions to attend coming up next. So if you could please do us this big favor and fill out this feedback form. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank our amazing presenter. This was such a great session, full of so much information, and it really caused me to kind of sit and think and really start to question a lot of things. So I really love that. Thank you so much for that inspiration and those thoughts and ideas during this time. It's such an important conversation, and I think this is just a great place to start and just kind of lead us into so much more. So thank you so very much. And if anyone that's joining us live has any questions, please feel free to put those into the chat. We would love to know that. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. We hope that you continue to join us in some other sessions today. And we hope that you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, everyone. Have a great one. Thank you so very much.